Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm just going to tell you 3 stories that will hopefully illustrate to you why I'll be voting yes and why you might want to think about voting yes as well. So, as is often the case, I heard the ambulance well before I saw it. I was 18 and I was walking in the morning towards my 6th form college, and it kind of roared past me. And I remember noticing it, and I remember thinking, I wonder where that's going. And you always think when you see an ambulance, I wonder, I hope it's not too bad, you know, the misery that that ambulance is going to. I thought, you know, heart attack, car crash, elderly person's had a stroke, something like that. And I didn't know. I carried on my journey and went to my college lesson. I found out later on that that ambulance was actually on its way to my house, where my father, who had recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer, had collapsed. And he actually died in that ambulance on the way to North Devon Hospital, aged just 49. So he was a heavy smoker, and it was a smoking-related cancer. But I think there was more to it than that. And when he was a child, his parents had sent him to private school in Glasgow. But he was severely dyslexic. And I don't think at that time, so we're talking, you know, early 40s, maybe, no, late 40s, early 50s, whether dyslexia was really a thing you could have then, or whether they just thought you were stupid. So I think there was a bit of that going on. So I think the school thought he was stupid, and when finally he failed his 11+ exams, his father then thought he was stupid, and they pulled him out of the school, and they basically just wrote him off. And I think he spent the next 30 years of his life trying to prove all of this wrong, trying to prove to himself that he wasn't actually stupid, because he wasn't. So one of the indicators we use to see how countries are doing is to do with this, and it's called life expectancy. And it's an indicator that we use as a proxy for health, so we can compare countries, how healthy are their populations, we can compare them against each other. And as many of you may be aware, Scotland's not doing too well by that indicator. And we were doing okay until about the 1950s, and then our position relative to the other countries in Europe started to decline. So much so that Scotland is now known as the sick man of Europe, because we've got one of the lowest life expectancies in Europe. And the curious thing about it is, despite being a relatively rich country, and actually we're worse than the country next door to us, England, which has the same government, the same policies. So it's interesting. Why is it that in areas of very similar deprivation, say a poor area in Glasgow and a poor area in Liverpool, why is it that the one in Glasgow will have the shorter life expectancy? Well, nobody really knows, but obviously it's a subject of academic interest, and they've called it the Scottish effect. So one of the theories put forward to answer this question was by the Glasgow Centre for Population Health, and they've said that since the 1950s, Scotland has been under what they call political attack. So it's this idea about having wave after wave of policy decisions visited onto you from above in quite a violent way. So maybe a good example of that would be the poll tax, by governments that you didn't vote for and you don't really have any protection against, means that Scots are frustrated, and they turn that frustration in on themselves. And so they die from these typical Scottish effect diseases that we see, like too much smoking and too much drinking and drug abuse and depression and so on. And Leslie Rizzock has said that she would say that these are the diseases of desperation.
Sorry, could you turn the volume up a little?
Maybe I'm standing too far away. Is that better? And in fact, the Scottish effect follows you. So being Scottish, you can leave the country, but your life expectancy as a Scot will follow you, possibly as it followed my father when we moved to Devon. If you move to say, let's say you move to England, you will still statistically follow the Scottish average and not the longer average of the people that live around you. And I think this is the failure to live up to your potential, caused by seeing yourself only as other people see you and not having control over your environment. And I think that is what the Scottish effect is. Because after all, if you're told enough times that you're too wee, and you're too poor, and you're too stupid, eventually you'll start to believe it. And in Scotland, we're living with the consequences of that now. Because some of us are hopeless, and they feel helpless, and that causes despair, and that causes us to die too soon. And I think that Scotland has been dying of a broken heart. So, 1992, while I was out dancing to Come As You Are by Nirvana, the Tory Chancellor, Norman Lamont, was quietly introducing the Private Finance Initiative, or as we would know it, the PFI schemes, where private investors, they build and they finance public infrastructure, things like schools and hospitals. So this was expanded under a Labour government as well. And instead of the government borrowing the money, which actually they can do at a relatively cheap rate, the private companies get involved, and this doubles the cost to the public. Now, just to put this into the wider perspective, the UK is actually the arch privatiser, and we are not normal in that by any stretch by European standards. We've privatised 40% more than the next biggest privatiser, which is France. And the latest example of this, of course, is the giveaway of our Royal Mail at a knockdown price. Because private finance is always hungry for more public goods that they can plunder for profit. And this was their chance with PFI to get into the huge markets and therefore the huge profit potential of health and education. And who's paying for it? We are. Average profits in the PFI schemes are a staggering 50%. And so this is causing massive problems. Some hospitals are having to hand over a fifth of their annual budgets, and some of them are in financial distress now. In Scotland, PFI is costing £1 billion a year. And because the local authority doesn't own the school or the hospital, no matter what else is happening with cuts or in the economy, those payments must be made. And so the only place where savings can come is in the service, and that's the service that we receive. And to add insult to injury to this whole sorry story is that the UK Treasury has admitted they don't even know if the private financiers are paying any tax on these obscene profits from the PFI because their portfolios are held in offshore tax havens. And just like the UK energy market, this profiteering is allowed or even encouraged by the UK government. And all the while, they'll be lecturing us about the unaffordability of our schools and our hospitals. So this is an example of what the common weal would call the failure of the me-first economy, chronically undervaluing the things that make for a good society. If you're going to let somebody else's economists rule over you and make all of your really, really big decisions, you'd better be damn sure that they've got your best interests at heart. Westminster's drift to the right and Scotland's resoluteness in sticking to the left means we're constantly fighting these policies forced onto us from above by a government that does not share our values. Westminster doesn't have Scotland's best interests at heart. They don't share our values. And if we want to live in a country that rejects Westminster's me-first model, and I think that we do, and instead we want to have an all-of-us-first model where people get paid a living wage, where quality family housing is affordable, where these big companies pay their taxes, and where good quality health and education are free and a right of every citizen, then we need to take hold of these reins and not sit back and let somebody else make all of these big decisions for us. About 7 years ago, my husband and I decided that we wanted to build our own house. I just had it in my head, I wanted to build an eco-house. I was a bit obsessed about it. So we went looking for plots and around the borders, and we lost out on quite a few. I think we bid on about 3 or 4, and people were outbidding us. It was 2007, I think, when all the property prices had gone a bit mad. So eventually we found one, and we bought it. And I think the reason we were able to buy it is because it's basically like that. It's a really steep slope, And I think the other people that had maybe looked at it to buy had just thought, do you know what, this just looks like it's a bit too much trouble and it's just going to be too difficult, and so they didn't bother. I suppose maybe I was what you would call a naive optimist at that point, and I just thought, oh, that'll be fine. So the next thing you've got to do if you're building a house is you have to get an architect on board, you need to do your plans and so on. So I had an architect lined up, I brought him to the site, and he took one look at it, and he said, you cannot get a house on here. Well, I was just devastated by this. I thought, I bought this plot, you know, maybe I've screwed up my family's future, this is a complete disaster. Anyway, it was quite a nightmare for a few days. I thought, no, just keep going. So I persevered, and eventually I did find an architect that could do a design that would fit onto the plot. And the funny thing was that every time I had a meeting at a plot, everybody that I met there, and it was mainly guys actually, they couldn't resist the opportunity. So, you know, it was whole-age people or people making deliveries, ground workers and so on. They just couldn't, they'd always, before they left, they'd always say to me, oh, this is going to be a nightmare, this is going to be too difficult, oh, I just can't see how this can be done. I was like, I heard it enough times after all, I just thought, fine, whatever. Anyway, I did have problems. It wasn't without its challenges, this build. Certainly not least because I couldn't get a builder that would take on the project, and so I had to hire in every single trade myself, and I ordered every single piece of material, from screws to roof tiles to windows, the lot. And for somebody who didn't know what they were doing, that was a significant challenge. I had problems with the designs, I had problems hiring people, particularly plumbers. It's hard to get a good plumber. I had massive problems with the health and safety guy. I don't know whether he'd taken a shine to me or something, but he just kept coming back. Annoying. And what will now only be referred to as the Scottish water incident, once I was actually crying in the street in sheer rage and frustration. But even after having to fire 4 different sets of plumbers and a rainwater tank that we never did quite get around to fitting, and lots of other minor mistakes and so on, we did get a house on there, and it's a great house. And the best thing about it is it's unique and it's personal to us. It's not somebody else's vision of what a family house should be. It's our house. It reflects how we wanted it to be and how we wanted to live in it as a family. And if I decided 4 years ago that that house would be too difficult to build a house there, that house that I've come from tonight, where I've actually seen people on the main road outside stop their cars, jump out to take a quick picture, that house wouldn't exist. And as Mandela said, everything seems impossible until it's done. And Scotland becoming independent seems like that to many people. Too difficult, they think, too risky. And the No campaign are more than happy to play on those fears. But as we all know, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And we shouldn't give up on Scotland before we've even started. Let's not content ourselves with somebody else's vision of how Scotland should be. Let's plan, and let's build our own vision of Scotland, a better Scotland. It might not be easy, I'm sure it won't be, but I'm sure it will be worth it. So let's refuse to accept other people's judgment of us as too wee and too poor and too stupid. Let's recognise the Scottish effect as a disease of despair, of not being in control of our own affairs. Let's reject the me-first economy from Westminster and instead choose an all-of-us-first economy that values people and plans for the future. If we don't, I'm concerned that an ambulance will be coming screaming past us, heading north, sirens blaring, to a dying Scotland, death by 1,000 cuts from the Me First coalition. Instead, let's vote yes. Let's build a better country, a country that reflects all of us, and a country that we can all be proud of. Thank you.